You could tell they're lonely, you know, they miss their family.
They come in assorted neon colors with black imprint. They are guaranteed for life in writing. Do you follow me? Yes, I follow you. Do you receive UPS? What is UPS?
Check on delivery.
Check on delivery. Hey, JR, come on down here, San Diego. I got a 5-foot margarita waiting for you right on the beach. There you go. Sound good, huh, JR? Hey, JR.
All I want to do is just help people.
I'm one of the guys that customize imprinted ballpoint pens for your business.
A lot of people, they're deported, they're depressed, and basically they don't find themselves here. And then go to the next one.
Springs next call, guys. Please get the owner on the phone.
People here in Mexico think all people that are deported are criminals. What we're trying to teach people is that, you know what, you're in Mexico here, so you got to put your feet on the ground and you got to try to adapt. And how do you do it? By first get a job. It's a numbers game, guys. That's all it is. This is a numbers game. Got to pass all the no's to get to the yes, people. That's all it is.
Hi, everyone. I am Simon Kilmurry. I'm the Executive Director of the International Documentary Association, and welcome to our conversation for the new short documentary film called Center Blues. I am thrilled to welcome Director Geeta Gandbhir. You will probably all know Geeta's amazing work on projects such as Why We Hate and I'm Evidence. She's an award-winning director, producer, editor, and really thrilled to have you here today, Geeta.
Thank you so much, Simon, and thank you for being here.
And joining us also is Jessica Devaney. Jessica is the founder and president of Multitude Films, which is a queer, woman-led company dedicated to nonfiction filmmaking, especially with a focus on underrepresented voices. And you will likely also know Jessica's prior work from films like The Feeling of Being Watched and recently Pray Away and Jackie Olive's wonderful film Always in Season. It's so great to see you guys working together again, and welcome, Jessica. Really happy to see you.
So great to be here. Thanks for being with us.
This is such a special film. I've seen so many films on migration and immigration, but this takes us to a whole different place. And I wanted to ask you both really about the genesis of your approach to this story. We've seen, particularly in the past 4 years during the Trump administration, a lot of films focused on migration, but none focused on this story. Can you talk about what was the genesis and how did you kind of devise your approach to the story?
Sure. So I think for me, I come from an immigrant background, like so many of us, here in the U.S., like, the majority of us, I guess I would say, here in the U.S. And I think this story, like many people, I had been following sort of the trajectory, even before the last 4 years of sort of the punitive policies around immigration. The U.S. actually has a fairly troubled history when it comes to immigration policy and gender. In general, we've seen things since really, if we look back in time, since we had the Chinese Exclusion Act, and then we had the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. We have recently in the last 4 years, there's been the Muslim ban and repeated, and even prior to that, punitive policies post 9/11 around Muslim communities and the surveillance of entire Muslim communities. So I think I've always been engaged, and just because of my own life experience and my family's life experience. And I think over the last 4 years, there's been a lot of attention paid to deportations, and also family separation at the border. It seems that policies have always been, again, punitive, but in the last 4 years with the past administration, it's like the cruelty ramped up about another, 100 times over. And I think, we all kind of were on edge and watching in sort of horror what was happening. And as you said, there were many stories about this, but the story of this community in Tijuana that the film is about. I had actually, I read an article in the New York Times at one point about the article was about the call centers that were sort of opportunistically springing up in Tijuana to recruit the English-speaking deportees because their numbers were so large. They were actually finding that it was lucrative to open these call centers, you know, and hire the deportees. And that, to me, was an angle into a story around migration that I hadn't really seen before. I think, as you so rightly said, there's been a lot about family separation. There's been a lot about this issue. It's in the news every day. And for me, I find that with a lot of documentary films, an angle in to a topic that people have not seen before often helps them to consider it in a different way. And with this film, this community that was incredibly brave and resilient and essentially trying to rebuild their lives in Tijuana despite incredible odds, facing all the things such as family separation, essentially, you know, being deported is akin to incarceration. So I think that, you know, for a lot of the folks who are trapped on the other side of the border when all they have known is the US, so that community felt like a really good way into, and just their personal story, sort of a slice of life, felt like a great way into the topic.
I appreciate you using the phrase community, because I think it kind of underscores your approach, which differentiates this story from so much of the other coverage where immigrants hoping to come to the US or people who are being deported from the US are treated as a group. And I think one of the things that the film does so wonderfully is transcend that, and you get a sense of community and a sense of individual stories. And there's, you know, talking of the punitive nature, one of your participants refers to this being a life sentence, which was really kind of a moving moment. Jess, when did you and Geeta first come together and, you know, talk about what the storytelling approach would be? How did that evolve?
So Geeta had been developing the idea with the team at Topic for a couple of months, and we're ready to kind of move to the next stage and gear up for production, which is when I came on board. And in general, like I love the chance to work with Geeta. So anytime she comes with a project, we always try to make that work. And I was particularly moved by the approach to this story that really stepped out of the headlines and looked at the ripple impact of deportation on individual and family lives. And I think something I'm really drawn to in the opportunity of documentary film is that we can really take that step back away from the headlines. We're not tasked with reporting the day-to-day and stuck in the 24-hour news cycle. And so we can look with that deeper point of view with a real bird's eye view. So I was really drawn to that approach in this story.
So I want to hear about how you approached Roberto and Jenna and the other people in the film, and what about their particular stories did you find appealing?
So I think I'm so glad you asked that, because I think, you know, it leads to a really important point. So for Multitude Films, Jess's company, and myself, it was really important to us to have representation within the team, because although, again, I come from an immigrant background, I am not of Mexican descent. You know, and it was critical to us to have representation on the ground in folks who were from at least Tijuana, from that, you know, live in that community and could hold us accountable and really, you know, again, bring integrity and, you know, and veracity to the story and work with us in that way. And so we found through Jessica, actually, we found a producer on the ground there. His name is Abraham Avila, and he worked with us. He was the person, actually, he was critical to the storytelling. He was able, because we are not based in Tijuana, he was on the ground. He is the one who found our participants. He found Danny and Roberto and Jenna and Alondra, and really did a lot of the work in gaining trust. I certainly, after they agreed to talk to me, we were able to have Skype interviews and FaceTime, and also, they got to know me and the team in New York. And I think, it was important. That trust was critical, because being a deportee in Tijuana puts you in a very vulnerable position. There is a terrible stigma from the local community, who basically, again, the narrative that comes from the US, which is that, the deportees are often criminalized, that bleeds over into Tijuana. So oftentimes in the culture there, they also see the deportees as, as criminals who must be at fault for, their deportation. And then, interestingly, particularly women are the most vulnerable. So for us, it was extremely challenging to find a woman who was working in the call centers, who would talk to us, who had been deported. They are often, Tijuana is a fairly traditional, even in some ways, Mexican society is somewhat more traditional. And so women who are deported face even a harsher stigma, and then are just more vulnerable in general, for all the reasons that, because of sexism, they're often vulnerable to violence, abuse, etc. But as a whole, a lot of the deportees are sort of pulled between, there's the call centers that want to recruit them. There are the cartels that also prey on them and try to recruit them for their English speaking abilities. And then there oftentimes, some of them may struggle with, again, with homelessness, and which can lead to, poverty, which can lead to substance abuse. So there's so much that the deportees are faced with. And oftentimes, again, doing a documentary film or being involved in a documentary film is the last thing on their minds. But Abraham was able to find, interestingly, we thought Jenna and Alondra, the two young women who are a couple, who we ended up having in the film. What we found so fascinating about them is they, as Jess really mentioned, are part of that ripple effect of what happens when someone is deported. Because Alondra's mother was deported when they were living in the US, they became homeless. And so Jenna and Alondra ended up following Alondra's mother to Tijuana, because the US was essentially really failing them. It wasn't providing them with the opportunities they needed. They couldn't, they were literally on the streets. And Tijuana had, at least had work for them in the call centers. So that was a really, I thought, a fascinating, perspective. This young couple that actually leaves the future of our country, leaves the country, and crosses the border to Tijuana in search of a better life. So it kind of speaks to much about the situation.
Yeah, I gotta say, I really appreciated hearing from both of them in the film, because it was really an unexpected moment when you realize that they're there because Alandra's mother was deported, and essentially, because of the punitive process we have, there's victims of that down the chain.
That's right. It's not just one family or like one person, it's an entire family, which fractures the family, which fractures the community, which ultimately we all suffer,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think it's I can't remember if it's Jenna or Alejandra who talk about, what are my choices? I could work in McDonald's and not be able to pay my rent, or I could come here and be near my mother and make some kind of a living. Even as challenging as that might be. I want to just before I continue with the kind of character, I want to go back to kind of the building the team, because I think you've done that with great intentionality. And Jessica, I want to hear from you, because I think that's kind of an ethic that Multitude brings to your work overall, is looking at at these issues of ethics and accountability, and how does one bring that to a more authentic and representative and just form of documentary storytelling?
Thank you for that question and just grounding it in a values-based approach. I think, you know, we really, and this is something Geeta and I are really aligned about, and our team at Multitude is the importance of integrity around authorship and a values-based approach to storytelling, both because it is ethical and because we believe that the best stories come when they're told with this kind of responsibility. So it's really important to us that you know, stories are told in a combination of insiders looking around, or that the core team has a real stake in the communities that will be most impacted by that story on screen. And I think sometimes this conversation can become a bit reductive and sort of feel like, are we checking the boxes of the right identities, of do we have someone in a key role of that identity? And it can really be evaluated in more complicated, complex ways. And there's a foundational question of like, how is the ways that we're structuring our production, how is the structure of our production countering this sort of like colonialist, anthropological kind of history of documentary, and offering something new? And what kinds of questions are we asking about how we're structuring our team? So no, Geeta is not from the deportee community in Tijuana, but Geeta, our DP Assad, coming from immigrant backgrounds, understanding particularities of tensions within different communities, our local team on the ground, the fact that Assad and a number of the local folks also worked in call centers and have had experiences there and understand the tensions of that kind of opportunistic capitalism. So there's both identity-based questions, experiential-based questions, and it really can't be reduced to box ticking.
I think there's been a lot of reductive conversations that are happening around questions around authorship, and I know that you wrestle with that in a much more complicated way, and it's also about power, right? I mean, you have people who are participants who are generous enough to share their lives, and they're often in very vulnerable positions, and you have power as producers and directors, as people who then take that story and shape it into a narrative, and questioning your own position with respect to that power. And I think that's, you know, that comes through in the film. It comes through in the intimacy that you have managed to attain. That's those are issues that you wrestle with in your storytelling.
I think one of the sort of the things that we want to also, like along with sort of the as Jessica mentioned, the concept of decolonizing documentary, you know, which has been, you know, the topic, something that we are working on and wrestling with. There's also the idea in some ways of giving, you know, there's this old trope of like, if you do films about underrepresented communities, you're giving voice to the voiceless. And that's also a trope that we must dismantle. Like it's, you know, no, absolutely not. You know, that like, obviously we are just like the idea, I think, for us as filmmakers is we're just a platform. You know, maybe we're a connection to a platform. But as you can see by this, when you look at this community, and you know, this community is absolutely organizing. This community is quite, you know, clear on what their needs are, and we are not. Again, that is still a part of the colonial mentality when you talk about the power dynamics. That you know, we are like again. I think we are lucky to be there. You know, really, we are just, you know, the idea that they are generous enough to share their stories with us is, I think, that the responsibility we hold is making sure that the story, that this ultimately what we fashion into a film is true to, you know, to their vision, right? It's their vision. So I think that's incredibly important when working, as you said, with vulnerable communities.
I want to talk about this. Irony is maybe the wrong word, but the how the capitalist model has somehow organized itself in a way to take advantage of people's punishment, or what is being what is presented as punishment with their deportations. It's a really confounding thing, because clearly people need, if they are deported, they still need to support themselves. But yet there's still what feels like a very uncomfortable predatory nature that forms around these call centers. And I'd love to just hear your thoughts on this. I'm wrestling with this and struggling with it. It makes me feel very uncomfortable.
No, certainly. And it's, it was interesting. It was so important in that way. Like I said, our team had everyone on our team that was on the ground except me had worked in a call center. So, and that was, so that was really critical. And as you see, call centers are springing up all over the world, right? Mm-hmm. It's part of, the idea, again, these, the call centers that where that are based in the US, right? Where the company is based in the US are farming out work to all these places because it's so much cheaper and they can pay a cheaper wage. That was something that would not be a living wage here at all, but over there you can perhaps survive on it. So the, and in Tijuana itself, there's call centers that are springing up for also that are French speaking, that essentially, because so many waves of migrants come through that city, there are call centers that are French speaking because there are a lot of Haitian migrants that travel through Tijuana. So they've sprung up to, try to recruit them as well. And then there's Spanish speaking ones as well that, not, of course, the local community might be employed there, but then there's also the migrants that come up from further south. So they also get pulled into that when they're stuck in Tijuana for a long period of time. I think ultimately it's cheap labor, it's cheap dispensable labor, and the call center always wins. Like, it's not that you can ever really, it's meant to be sort of, it's meant to essentially be work that is not necessarily long-term for folks. They don't actually end up, there is nowhere to go, I guess, within the company ranks after a certain point. Like, there's no increase in pay. There is no real, it's not like there's benefits, so the call centers are absolutely set up just as money-making schemes for the companies that, that have them, as a necessity. It's a necessity. You have to have a call center. It's a necessity for sometimes for sales, and it's a necessity for problem solving, right? But when the folks who work in them otherwise are mostly young locals who are a lot of students, a lot of Mexican students work in them. And then eventually they leave, right? It's like something you do during college, like pre-college, and then ideally you get out of there. Once you're trapped in that cycle, though, of just being there for, like I said, there is no future for the folks who are in there. Again, the idea is a lot of folks like Danny have decided to start their own call center. And I think Danny's intentions around starting his own call center, to help deportees is slightly different. He sees it as a means to an end. But generally, the way that it works is it's not really for the benefit of anyone. And you see any of the employees, and you see this, the call centers also don't really care if you show up. They just care that you show up to work. They don't care if you show up high. They don't care if you show up drunk. They don't care if you do drugs in the call center itself. They don't care what you do, as long as you do your hours. Mm-hmm. And so it's a sort of a factory assembly type situation that doesn't ultimately benefit the folks there.
It's kind of also like the natural outcome of capitalism and structural oppression of people's labor, looking for opportunities to be self-serving in that way. And I think it's interesting to see how Danny's call center sort of rises up kind of in the middle of that. You know, it can't counter the whole system, but it can kind of offer an alternative that is more worker centered and is concerned with the needs of the deportees.
Yeah, no, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because Danny himself has lived that experience, and I think that lived experience obviously brings to him a set of values that he's trying to help people find their feet. He knows what they've gone through. He's been there 20 years, and for him to design his business that way is quite different than the kind of cycle of predatory capitalism where you have, you know, Roberto, who's brought to the US at age 6, ends up getting deported, working in a call center and helping some guy in Pittsburgh find his car, and it's the car rental company in the US that is profiting off his deportation and cheap labor. It's deeply troubling cycle of predation.
Absolutely. And I mean, but it's like you see, like you said, it's that cycle. The fact that, you know, the deportations and the number of them are called, like there are, the number of call centers is overwhelming. So that speaks to, you know, how much, you know, the numbers of deported, you know, are enough to fill them, which is, you know, which is incredibly alarming, right? Like,
I want to maybe move to a little, maybe more of a hopeful part of the film, because the film is I mean, that's what's remarkable about the stories in the film, and Roberto really touched me deeply. This notion of home, and he talks about it, and I wonder if you can share a little bit more about that difference between from maybe from his perspective, from your observations, that difference between the place where you live and that place that we call home.
it's so funny because for myself, like I think that when you you know, as someone who has, you know, an immigrant background, and there's the question of home has always been this you know, this sort of looming kind of, you know, horizon, I guess something that I've never quite been able to figure out, you know, because I think there is you know, there's obviously, you know, for my own family on a personal level, there's where you're from, right? There's where you're from, and then there's where you live, and eventually, you know, sometimes you know, home transitions from being one to the other, eventually, depending on the period of time. What was particularly if it's voluntary migration, right? When it's involuntary migration, I think that is never resolved. It is never resolved. You've always been denied your home. As Roberto said, it's a life sentence. So that I think is one of the things, even though again, this community is incredibly resilient. Danny has a family there. You know, he's built a life there. He's sort of, in some ways, he's accepted where he is, and he's determined to make the best of it, make the best of it for others. Roberto too, you know, is also, like, he's an incredible advocate and activist. He's working with deported veterans. He's making sure to do, you know, advocacy and activist work around migrants who are coming up from the South, you know, and making sure that they are fed and you know, that, and not mistreated, and trying to find housing for them. But at the same time, you know, he even though he's been, you know, in Tijuana for however long, because it was not his choice, you know, and the US was really what he, you know, the only home he knew beforehand. There is no, that, you know, again, home is something that he's separated from. And I think that when it is not your choice, when it is involuntary, when it is forced on you, I think there is no question that, you know, that the heart never heals over around that. It just, it's a, it is a permanent loss and an injustice right? That's the other part of it too, is that I think these folks feel very deeply that it's, it's unfair. And we talk about family separation at the border right now, and everyone is deeply, deeply touched by that, which as they should be, and we should be. But interestingly, we don't necessarily see deportations and deportees the same way. And I think the same attention sort of needs to be paid to that. What is the price? What is the price that is paid? Not just by the deportee, but by everyone around them.
Well, I mean, this is, I think, a mark of wonderful observational filmmaking, because you capture everything you said in a moment when Roberto and Estella are talking, and she's about to go to the US for a quick visit, and he's wondering, you can just see the kind of the anxiety in his body language, because he can't do that. And all the issues that just that simple crossing of a border mean to him. It's really this one of those palpable moments which you feel all that's lost in that one transaction, in that one interaction. I want to, if I can, talk to you again, going back to this kind of sense of community, because we, as a country, have policies which unceremoniously send these people back, but and essentially leave them to fend for ourselves. But we have also communities which form, which we see in the film, like the one led by Pastor Mauricio, and what's the role and kind of support that those kind of communities of faith provide to some of these migrants?
So from what I saw, and in speaking to the pastor, so the pastor again himself is a deportee, right? Which I think, and that profound experience led him to struggle with depression, with substance abuse. And Roberto too had the same issue. Roberto is also, again, the pain of being separated led him to depression and substance abuse. And I think, and then once you are on the streets, you are even more vulnerable. If you are in those situations, you're vulnerable to the cartels and to sort of dangerous elements that, can prey on you and recruit you and ultimately do you harm. So I think Mauricio, in his own journey, the founding of the church really, was meant to be an alternative, right? An outlet and a community, right? To sort of a safe space, a safe haven for folks to come without judgment. A lot of women too, what I didn't mention previously, but a lot of women end up being trafficked, like women who are deportees, who are desperate, who have no money, end up doing sex work, or, again, they fall victim to traffickers. And so that is something too that the church was working very hard to bring people in off the street, who might be involved in that sort of work that can be that can be harmful to them, if they're in that situation. And I think that, you really see what was really powerful to me was to see in this, again, not just at the church, but with both Danny and Roberto, the incredible desire to help others, the incredible desire to build and to make sure that others don't go through what they went through, that there is some foundation there for people who are coming in because they've all been through it and they all know how terrible it could be. So that was, I think, in the church scene was really powerful to me. The church seeks to be the sort of alternative between there's really the call centers, which are just kind of, again, factually like kind of labor, and yes, it's a living wage, but perhaps, or they can survive off of it. It's still predatory. Then there's the cartels, and the streets, which are a big pull, and so the church is trying to be, again, a place where you preserve your humanity in all this, because one of the things about deportation is how incredibly dehumanizing it is, right? You are, again, you're criminalized, you're stripped of everything, you have oftentimes no money, no finances. You stripped of everyone, So it's trying to, again, sort of resurrect the humanity through religion.
I think it also speaks to like the two tracks of, there's resistance and organizing, and then there's the community building and mutual aid that happens kind of alongside and feeds into resistance and organizing. And if we're talking about Roberta's veteran group or Danny's call center or the church, that those are all places that kind of fill that role of community building, not explicitly as mutual aid, but also offering those things that kind of create the space where we can also then, from which we can also then challenge these oppressive structures that are creating the problems in the first place.
There's a moment towards the end of the film which almost feels like it's a prophecy of what is still to come, that we will just keep repeating these cycles. And it's an interaction with a young man who I think is about to begin his own journey crossing the border, and he says something which is really kind of takes your breath away, but when you ponder it, is really kind of meaningful. When he talks about God bless Trump, and may he live to see kind of the error of his ways, something to that effect, and that borders are not man-made. And in some ways, through kind of that very kind of simple distillation, he's saying that we're gonna just keep banging our heads against the wall by repeating these cycles of punishment, and that we're all just trying to live the best lives we can. I would love to hear from you, Geeta and Jess, when you first encountered that moment. What was your reaction, and what am I interpreting kind of what he's saying, or am I laying my own meaning onto it?
I think you. So he said, that is one of the most moving moments to me, in all of the, everything I witnessed. There was so much that was powerful, but that moment really, kind of, I think my heart sort of stopped, because to see this young man who had traveled with, he was with a young woman, and they had traveled so far. They had traveled so far through, like, unprecedented danger. We'd all, there had been we have some of the footage of it but essentially there had been, the kind of, there was a group at the border, that was at the border, that had been tear gassed. Helicopters had flown over from the US to tear gas, to drop, tear gas on everyone. And, we were in that crowd, and it just, it was so appalling, everything that had happened. And to see this young man still with such grace say, may God bless it. When I think about Trump and what he was doing, and at the Trump at the time, the former president was labeling, the entire group of migrants, the migrant caravan, and talking about how dangerous they were. And it was, all just so kind of horrible. And but to hear him say, may God bless him, and one day maybe he'll live to regret everything he's said, and he's done, that, that was astonishing to me. And then his, he sort of pulled out this biblical quote about the fact that, he said borders are man-made. And, God never said that, Egyptians couldn't go to Babylon, and vice versa. It's all, I actually thought it was something more almost existential, that he was saying that this is on us. Like, we've built these borders. This is not God's plan, and ultimately God wills differently. So I'm going to cross this border, like, and there was something, we had an amazing conversation with Vince Warren, and he said that, Vince Warren from the Center for Constitutional Rights, and he said something that I thought was really powerful and spoke to me about the film that I hadn't thought about. He said that oftentimes the most marginalized people, like BIPOC people, LGBTQ folks, but a lot of communities are not optimistic, but they hold on to hope. We hold on to hope in the fiercest way. because it is, you know, what keeps you going, the belief that it can be better. And in that young man, that's what I saw. You know, I don't think he was optimistic. I think he knows exactly what the administration across the border was trying to do. And, you know, but at the same time, the refusal to give up, and the, you know, sort of the insistence on believing that it can be better, that we can get there, that we can sort of maybe envision in one day live out God's plan, which is that there wouldn't be no borders. That's what I took from it. That's what maybe I was being hopeful. Jess, what do you think?
No, I think, I mean, I'm just also remembering the conversations around that piece in the edit room, and you know, how juicy our conversations with Beery Lieberman, who was the editor, and like, where should this part come in the film, because it was such a poignant and foundational philosophical piece of what we were trying to get at. And in addition to all of the beautiful things that you just said, Geeta, which I completely agree with, it was also really important that we weren't centering Trump and the policies of that administration as solely responsible for the immigration problems that we're facing right now, because that is not the truth. And taking a step back, looking at it as like a philosophical problem of nation states as they exist in the world right now, and specifically the US's role in that. So it was both like political, religious, philosophical, and I think is really kind of the anchor that we want the film to leave folks with.
I think that's so important to hear, and I really appreciate hearing the that difference between optimism and hope, and not centering the past 4 years, because as you say, this is not a problem of the past 4 years, nor the prior 4 years. It's a problem of generations, and has just been perpetuated in different forms for hundreds of years. And that kind of brings me to you know, where I kind of want to kind of wrap us up, if I may. And it's, you know, as documentary filmmakers, you want your films to be out there, to be helping to seed conversations, to be helping really using story as a way to bring nuance and depth to conversations. So I want to hear about how the film is being used, what your plans are, who your partners are for in terms of outreach. This I feel has a lot to add to a lot of the great work that people are doing on the policy side, on the activism side. But this brings another level of human storytelling to those conversations and the activism that we're seeing.
Jess, I'd love for you to take this, because Multitude has done so much, and Topic have done so much incredible work around this, honestly, this film. So please.
So like, I think just to take a step back, you know, no film can be a silver bullet solution to any particular issue. And part of our producing model at Multitude is thinking about across our slate how films can build impact over time, and that the relationships that we have with movement leaders also inform how we build our slate, inform the films themselves often, and that we're really meeting movements where they are and not trying to like bring movements into our film work specifically. So that's sort of like the kind of guiding ethos around that. And, you know, in the last couple of months, we've had a number of events with organizations like Raíces, Center for Constitutional Rights. We have one coming up on Friday with United We Dream. CUNY Clear, who focuses on Muslim immigrants in the US and has been really active, particularly around the Muslim ban. As well as a number of individuals who have had personal experiences. What we've been hearing from movement leaders when it comes to this film in particular is, you know, these folks are often doing the front lines organizing of what is happening right now, both in terms of relief work with individuals and families that are facing the outcomes of these policies, and in shaping, new policies, hopefully, and doing the kind of advocacy work at that level. And they've all sort of shared in different ways that a film, and in this way that kind of takes a step back and looks at the ripple effect of deportation beyond the initial trauma, kind of helps paint a picture of what these outcomes mean over time, and what the longer term implications are of those. So some films have like are structured around we're gonna get people to change this one law, or we're gonna get people to change this one behavior. And we're really trying to have a conversation that looks at, the bigger picture of the implications of our current immigration policies on people's lives in the long term.
Yeah, I really, I couldn't agree with you more, Jessica. I think we make the mistake often in our field of placing too heavy a burden on a particular film to have a particular outcome. And the reality is that there are many social movements and activists, individuals, groups, organizers, lawyers, who are part of actually leading the charge on progressive social movements. And storytelling can be an important element, but it's an element. It's never the whole thing. And it's an unfair burden to place on filmmakers to make that change too. You're not the policy experts necessarily. And
or it's like a narcissistic way of thinking about like our own work.
Totally.
It's a number of different forms, but it's a little perspective is helpful.
So for those who haven't seen the film yet, tell us about where they can see it, what your release plans are, how they can share it with others.
Jess, you can go ahead for that too, please.
Okay.
Go for it.
So the film is currently screening on Vimeo at Topic Stories channel. It's a staff pick, and we're going to have a wider launch on Topic's streaming platform in the spring.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you both for a gift of a film. Really, I've watched it now 4 times. A really kind of intensely emotional and rewarding journey. I so enjoyed spending time with Danny and Roberto and Alondra and Jana and what you and your team. And I want to state that you have a really good team working with you. We don't do these films alone, but you've given us all a gift, and we appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It means everything.